And what is a reasonable doubt? It's a fair and honest doubt growing out of the evidence or lack of evidence. And let's talk about the lack of evidence in this case. All the things that the police didn't do. They didn't look at Reginald Burke's phone or get a recording of Reginald Burke's 911 call. They let it get destroyed. Did not listen to any other 911 calls. Why would they do that? Maybe they didn't want to go out and have to track down witnesses that would have confirmed Reginald's story. Did not listen to dispatch tapes or have any of the police officers listen to dispatch tapes so that they could identify voices and call-out numbers. Did not inventory the purple van. But this right here shows their bias because they don't want to know, don't want to remember the truth of where they were at and what they did. Did not have a glass expert look at the bullet hole, entrance versus exit. They had Diaz testify about it, but we know that he's not a glass expert. He's just an evidence tech. But see, that's where experience matters. I didn't know that at the time. That in fact, you have to have a glass expert tell you whether it's an interior, a shot that comes in, or a shot that goes out. And we know Diaz is not an expert in glass. Did not have a blood spatter expert look at the evidence. Did not have the MS Pre-Crime Lab do a DNA test on the bullet. And how my bottle of wine. Anybody know? Let's do this one right here. Did not get a report from the mechanic who found the bullet. Did not interrogate Derek Payne, Kevin McClung, Kinte Anderson, or Raquel Wright, or Deontay Wright, or Talisha Mills about the major inconsistencies in their stories. Did not get a written statement from Gerald Corbin or question him until 6 months later, and still no written statement. Did not make a report of any witness who did not support their story. Never reinvestigated after a preliminary examination when Erica Lomax and Stephanie Lomax put guns in the Wrights' hands. Never searched the Wrights' house for guns, like Stephanie Lomax told them they should do. Did not make the connection between the gun that Kinte Anderson described in his statement and the gun found in Quinton Bohannon on April 30th. Did not interview anyone at the hospital or review medical records. What may they have found had they done that? What kind of interesting circumstances was there when Mark Edwards was brought in? We'll never know. Did not canvass the neighborhood for any witnesses. Did not test the van for gunshot residue. Did not bring subpoenaed daily activity logs. Again, it shows their bias. And what else shows their bias? Is this. I'm sure when DeJuan Burks told you that the police officer didn't write down what he said correctly and told me he'd change it later, you were like, sure. But then when you hear that same thing from Gerald Corbin, who has no interest in this game, has no stake in this outcome, and the same thing from Monty Stewart, Stephanie Lomax, then you start to understand what DeJuan Burks was trying to tell you. But this isn't a case of reasonable doubt. This is a case of actual innocence. And from the beginning, I was so focused. I had this tunnel vision. And all I could see was the reports and the same kind of evidence that the police were looking at. And the testimony from Erica Lomax and Monty Stewart, because you know I was out there trying to talk to witnesses, trying to find out what happened. And I was so certain that Reginald had acted in self-defense. And I believed that the bullet that came from his gun was the one that actually killed Mark Edwards. And then I remember so clearly. And I think maybe that's the same thing the prosecutor suffered from. But I remember so clearly, after the second day of trial, when we were back at my office working, and one of the girls that works with me, Sarah, she said, we just got the ballistics report. She said, let me see the forensics on this. Because she worked for the Innocence Project before. I'm like, okay, I don't know what the hell I'm going to show you. But she looked at the ballistics, and then she's like, let's see the pictures. I'm like, well, let me see if I can find them. And I do find them. And she looks at the pictures, and she's looking at them, and I start looking at them. And then I see this picture. And I take my computer and I zoom up in on it so I can see it real clearly. And it hits me like it's hard to know, no analogy, like a Mack truck. And I realized for the first time that, in fact, Reginald Burks didn't kill anybody. And immediately when I realized that, about 10 o'clock at night, I called Reginald up. I tell him, Reg, I got some good news, and I got some bad news. what do you want to hear first? And he said, give me the good news. And I said, no. And this wasn't the first time that old Reg and I had a good news, bad news conversation. Because one of those Saturday mornings when he was sitting in the Wayne County Jail, I went and visited him. I said, Reg, I got some good news and I got some bad news. And he said, Dan, what's that? I said, Reg, the good news is, well, let me give you the bad news first. The bad news is you're sitting in jail and you're charged with murder. And Reg is like, thanks, Dan. Wasn't aware of that. Now tell me what the good news is. I said, Reg, the good news is that one day this is going to come to an end. And when that day comes, when the truth finally comes out, you are going to have an appreciation for life that very few people have. You will appreciate every breath you take. You will appreciate every moment with LaTanya. You will appreciate every single little thing that your kids do, even the things that annoy you and drive you crazy when they run around because they're so little. You will sit there and you will praise the moment because that is what this experience is going to give you. And I know you don't want this experience, but for whatever reason, this is your path and this is our path. And one day, the truth will come out. And so when I call him on the phone, I said, Reg, the good news is you didn't kill anybody. Because I know that in spite of the fact that he knows that he was justified in his actions, and I knew he was justified in his actions, that caused him a lot of guilt. And I know that from the way he responded when Detective Hampton tells him at his interrogation in the first minute or so. When he says to Detective Hampton, is what I heard true? And Detective said, what? That a boy's dead? And Reg's like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, it's true. The 6-year-old boy's dead. And Reg puts his head down. He starts to cry. And I know that's been weighing on his conscience for a long time. And so I said, Reg, the good news is you didn't kill anybody. And he said, well, what's the bad news? I said, bad news is I just figured it out. And we're 2 days into trial. And hopefully we can still do something about it. And by the grace of God, we were able to do something about it. And that's when I started looking for a bloodstain pattern analysis person, expert. And that's how my path and your paths and Reg's paths crossed with Joe Slemko. And the prosecutor wants you to believe somehow that Joe Slemko is coming here to build his resume. But do you remember when he was on the stand and I asked him, Joe, what's your criteria for taking a case and testifying on behalf of the defense? And he started to tell you, well, being a police officer, you know, it's hard. And then the judge cut him off. And he said, I think this is an issue. This might be, you know, the province of the jury. But had the judge not cut him off, he would have told you that my criteria for taking a case from defense is to prevent a miscarriage of justice. When I know that a person is actually innocent, that's the only time that I take a case for defense. And how do you know that's true? Look at his curriculum vitae. Out of all the times he's testified in court, there was only 5 cases that were for the defense. That's how we know that Joe Slemko is impartial and why Joe Slemko came here and what he had to share with you. But now let's talk about the reasons why Reginald Burks is actually innocent. Because Joe Slemko and Guy Nutter both told you he was. Because a criminal would want an innocent man to be convicted to end the investigation. Because Raquel Wright and Robert Wright had guns. And guns were found by, actually it should be E. Jackson, a gun on Quentin Bohannon that matches the gun that Kinty describes to the police. Derek Payne, he makes the statement, if I had a gun, I would have had a shot 50 times, not no one time. How did he know that somebody that was with them had shot one time? Because they did. And he is a man on the street. Remember he told you, I'm gonna go take care of it like a man takes care of it. I'm gonna squash it. And we know what kind of person he is by the question when I asked him, are you a law-abiding citizen? He says, I'm a citizen. And we know he's experienced in the courtroom because he didn't like the question I asked him. He said, objection. And we also know what kind of person he is by the last question the prosecutor asked him. Do you remember that narrowly tailored question? Derek, have you been convicted of a felony involving theft or dishonesty in the last 10 years? And he says no. But why is he asking that narrowly tailored question? Think about all the room that leaves open for things he may have done, for things that he did. Bullet found does not match Reg's gun. No DNA test done on the bullet. No bullet strike in line with the bullet hole in the back window. If the bullet came in from the back window, where did it go? You've seen the picture of the van. You've seen that there's no bullet strikes. And remember Guy Nutter, in his opinion, he said if he had a bullet strike, then he could be certain as to where the bullet came from. But Guy Nutter had 6 days between the time he got the report and the time that he came to court to sit here with the prosecutor when Joe Slemko testified, and another 3 days. Why, if that's what the information he needed to be certain, why on earth did he not ask Raquel Wright, or have the prosecutor ask Raquel Wright, where's the van? Let me go inspect the van to see if I can find a bullet strike. Or maybe he did. And maybe the police did. Because wouldn't that just make logical sense? And maybe they found the bullet strike or a mark in line with the bloodstain pattern. Reginald immediately called 911. No one else did. Reginald spoke with the police that night. Reginald met with the police and submitted to a 1-hour interrogation as soon as he knew someone was hurt and someone else was charged. And thank God it was recorded. And the only reason why it was recorded is because the FBI oversight of the Detroit Police Department. It's the only reason that that interrogation was recorded. Juan's written statement supports Reginald's, and it was given independently. Raquel Wright, Kent Anderson, and Kevin McClung's attempt to frame Chris Bohannon. That's what people do who commit a serious crime. If they can, they frame an innocent person. That way, Chris Bohannon goes down for the crime, and they're free. And poor Chris Bohannon. If Reginald hadn't come forward, you know that this same prosecutor, another prosecutor, would be up here arguing, ladies and gentlemen, we got 3 independent eyewitnesses. Now what are the statistical probabilities of 3 people identifying the same person independently? And you probably do a diagram like 1 in 6 times 1 in 6 times 1 in 6. 1 in 216. That's the chances that they picked up Chris Bohannon. And poor Chris Bohannon would have rotted his life in prison. Hampton's choice not to investigate. The prosecutor's gamesmanship. And I think that speaks for itself. The police refuse to bring their daily activity logs and don't listen to dispatches because they prove that they spoke to Reg. You remember all the police officers that came here? The ones that didn't have a report on the first day back? They had no clue what this case was even about. And they sat there with this deer in the headlights look. And, you know, they're involved in so many cases. And if they don't make detailed reports, how are they supposed to remember? But they could have remembered had they gone and looked at their daily activity logs where it's a lot more detailed as to where they were and what they did. Or they could have listened to the dispatch. But why didn't they? If the prosecutor would have ordered them to do that, if he was interested in the truth, wouldn't they? Doesn't it only seem logical that they would have done that? And then we got Art Wimmer, who's listed at 12. Art Wimmer. Now he came here as an expert in cell phone location. But what did we learn from him? We learned that there's a lot of things that can interfere with a signal and what tower it goes to, like rain or weather or the amount of traffic that day. And that Bill could be standing right here and make one phone call one day and get one tower, and make the phone call the next day and be in the same location and get another tower. He admitted that that's all true. And that with 911, that there's a law in place that requires them to get more detailed information from those calls. That he says that apparently that's destroyed in the city of Detroit after 7 days. But what else do we learn about him? What's maybe most important is that he claims that he testified, swore under oath, and he's a seasoned police officer who knows not to guess. I mean, you've seen these people look at reports. They don't remember? Let me check my reports. claims that he didn't have any contact with this prosecutor till 12/20. We were already 6 days into trial. And they had the information from Reginald Burks as to where he was and what he was doing back on April 28th when Hampton talks with him. But it's not that the prosecutor waits till December 20th to act. And he doesn't call him in his case in chief. He calls him as a rebuttal witness. But to rebut what? He already knew the information that Reginald was going to testify to. But he calls him, but the amazing part is that he lists them. If you recall back, and it's hard to recall back to December 14th, and if there's anything you don't recall about the testimony from last year, or anything you don't recall about the testimony, you can ask the court reporter and they'll read it back to you. Because this is a very important decision. But he's not contacted. The prosecutor reads him off on 12/14. He's not contacted until 12/20. How did the prosecutor know what Art Wimmer would testify to